Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you guys are. Welcome to the GMI Competency in the EX World webinar. Bob, we can start our presentation. We have collected several of your questions during sign up, and we have a busy schedule, so we will move on without any further delay. Let me first introduce Bob, our speaker today. Bob has over 30 years of experience in the EX world and is a COMPEX instructor and an instructor for the IECEX COPC scheme. I hope I said that right, Bob.
You did.
He is also an inspector and a member of the US ULSTP committee, which means he is very, very qualified to discuss competency today with us. Before we begin the presentation, I will take only a few minutes to introduce GMI, who we are and what we do and why we do it. So GMI is a safety company. We design, engineer, manufacture a range of intrinsically safe and SIL certified devices for all the automation packages, DCS, SD, fire and gas, in all the industries, from oil and gas to food and beverages. We have a long experience, over 40 years, and we are proudly an Italian company. So we manufacture 100% of our product here in Italy. However, we are a global player. Next, Bob. Safety is what matters to us. So we try our best to provide safe product. So we use state-of-the-art technologies. We have full traceability of our product. 100% testing on every single device we ship out has been 100% tested. We are ROS and REACH compliant. We are SC3, so C3 certified, not only our product, but our company. And of course, our motto is customer satisfaction. But to do so, we do so with products that are trying to better the world we live in. So safe product for a safer world. Next, Bob. These are the products we manufacture. So we have IS barrier, safety relays, isolators, we have power supplies, we have multiplexer, temperature multiplexer, heart multiplexer, we have termination boards, we have SPD or surge protectors, we have loop indicators, and we also have a division that manages functional safety, training, and services. And we are adding, as soon as this COVID will allow us, a EX division. So we do training and services in the EX world. Next, Bob. As I said, we are present around the world. So we have 8 direct subsidiaries. We have many distributors. We are about 200 people. We used to run a lot of courses live. Now we do webinars. And we have thousands of installations all around the world. Here's the next is our short list of our customer. We basically interface with all the system vendors from ABB to Yokogawa. We have supplied many projects around the world to all the EPCs, and we have many OEMs with whom cooperate. We cooperate with many OEMs from Schlumberger skids to GE or Siemens gas turbo machinery. And we are in the AVL of many, many end users. So next, we are about ready to begin. Before we do so, a short note. We have collected your questions during the sign-up phase, and we will answer them after the presentation. Feel free to ask any question during the presentation. Of course, don't ask me about what's on for dinner tonight, because I don't have the answer to that. But you can use the question and answer box that you see there, somewhere around there. Just type your question there, and we will try to get to it in time, before the end of the presentation. Okay, Bob, it's all yours now.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Paulo. So this is a topic that is somewhat near and dear to my heart. As Paulo mentioned, I am a COMPEX instructor and assessor, and our organization is actually an IECEX competency or certificate of personnel competency recognized training program. We'll talk all about that, but it is something that is near and dear to my heart, and I hope this will be entertaining. I hope this will be interesting. But of course, we have to talk about what is competency. To understand, we have to understand what is the definition. So the definition that most people would agree with is a combination of knowledge, your skills, and behavior. So just because you have knowledge on a subject, if you don't have the skills in which to execute it, then you're not necessarily competent. If you have skills, but yet you don't really know what you're doing, well, again, you're not really competent. And of course, the exercise of the behavior of what you're actually doing, if you have the knowledge and the skills, but you don't do it, well, again, you're not competent. So competency is really these three things. And that's really what everybody would agree upon. And this is a key thing. Just because you have a ton of experience, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're competent, right? And again, we use some examples of an experienced residential electrician who wires new house would not be competent to work on a drilling rig. They may have the knowledge of electricity. They may have the knowledge and skill set and experience in doing that type of work, but not necessarily this type of work. So these are all things that we have to keep in mind, that whether or not you're determining whether or not you're competent, understand your skill set, what your knowledge base is, and how you've executed it, right? And the bottom line, and this is really key, is the bottom point here: you must be assessed in the performance of these critical job skills to be deemed competent. Now, the assessment is usually the area in which it always raises necessarily, potentially, a red flag, because is that assessment have to be done by a third party? Does it have to be done external to your organization? No, it doesn't say that. Certain industries do require that, but other industries don't. So the assessment portion of it is usually critical, because many of you have probably been to lunch and learns from a manufacturer or something like that, or have done those, and they'll give you a lot of good information, but have you actually been assessed on what knowledge you actually learned from that lunch and learn? So the important thing is being the assessment, and that could be in the form of exams, it could be forms of practical assessments, whatever it is. So where does a lot of the competency stuff in the EX world really derive from? And it really came from the 1988 Oxy Petroleum Piper Alpha platform that exploded, and 167 people lost their life. Piper Alpha was a wake-up call for the offshore oil industry, and it really, at that particular point in time, it was very fast and furious. But with that came out quite a bit of changes, if you will, with how the North Sea operators started to operate. So there was an investigation that took about 2 years, and it was called the Cullen Report. And you can go online and you can download it. And it took about 2 years. And after it was published, there was 106 recommendations. And every single one of those recommendations were actually implemented by industry. And one of the things that came out of it was that the employer should be responsible for the competency of its employees. So what took place? Every offshore operator carried out immediate wide-ranging assessments, improvements to the permit to work management system, which was a very important key point that came out of Piper Alpha, and then of course initiation of formal safety assessments. What was interesting about this is that even though this Cullen report had come out, it was really the other owner-operators that really pushed the need for competency. So it was the remaining operators in the North Sea that the technical advisors got together and they started discussing, and Piper Alpha was not an electrical issue. It was more of a lockout, tagout, and responsibility of individuals of doing their jobs, but it very well could have been potentially. So all the owner-operators, the technical authorities on the electrical side, basically came up with the initial program, and it was called CompX, and it started in 1994. Now, CompX went along, and basically it wasn't something that was mandated government-wise, but it was basically if you wanted to set foot on a Shell rig or a BP rig in the North Sea, that was a requirement. by the owner operator. When the ATEX directives came into play, specifically the ATEX 153 directive, it really became part of the regulatory agencies. Now they insisted that if individuals started going into these facilities and potentially were responsible for an explosion taking place or some sort of disaster, the owner operator could be held liable. So therefore, programs like COMPEX started to increase. Now, it boils down to where are the competency requirements defined? And basically within the 60079 set of standards, competency is really defined in two main standards, the -14 standard and the -17 standard. And it is also now in the 80079-34 standard. If you want to take a look at it in the 60079-14, it's in Annex A. In the -17 standard, it's in Annex B. In the -34 standard, it's actually, I believe, in Section 7, if I'm not mistaken. So we're starting to see these competency requirements showing up in some of these international standards. Just because it's in a standard does not necessarily mean, in effect, that any governmental regulation is going to insist upon it. However, what you are finding now is that governmental regulators, if you will, are now insisting that if you're going to build systems and you're going to comply with these international standards, then you also need to comply with the competency requirements. So these are just three examples of organizations worldwide that have now started to demand competency in their facilities. So Paulo, if you're there.
Yeah. Sorry, Bob. I just didn't want to distract everybody with my face looking at you. So I log out. But we have a poll question. It was very interesting what you said, and I found that one statement quite interesting where you said that the employer turned out to be responsible for the competency of his employees, and I believe that is correct. But every time we run a course, for the complex course or a SEAL course, there's a cost involved, but the employer rarely wants to pay for this cost. And you contradict what you're saying there. All right, let's launch a poll. See if you guys have been following what I've been talking about here. So we have a question. What standard includes defined specific level of competency? It's a multiple choice answer, so you guys, it means it's more than one. It's a giveaway. All right, let's see some answers. Let's see. Okay, we have about 50% people voted, so let's give a few more. I don't know how guys you can answer this question because the numbers are so hard to remember. I would not be able to.
That's okay.
How Bob, you did it. You remember all the. And
I should know the answers to this.
For sure. I hope you know the answer. All right, within a few more seconds, and then we end the poll. All right, let's end the poll and see what's happening here. All right, share our results. So, all right, the winner here is the 7914.
And that is the correct answer, but it is also referenced within 17. It is referenced in the -34 standard. And I threw a little bit of a curveball here because it is also referenced in the 61508 and the 61511 functional safety standards as well. So competency is actually showing up in a lot of different IEC standards, and not just IEC standards, in the EN versions of them, as well as other international standards out there. So be aware of that.
Like most of you answer correctly now.
That is true. That is true. Well done. And by the way, 60079-10-1 deals with area classification under gases. So if you're curious as to what that standard is, that's what that standard is.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, let's move forward then.
So if we fast forward from 1988 and then we start looking at more recent history, we look at what happened here in the United States with Deepwater Horizon. The key thing is obviously 11 people died, but the economic impact was phenomenal. It was $45 billion, which is very difficult to kind of put your head around. But obviously the environmental impact was huge. And this was also somewhat a wake-up call for the offshore oil industry.
They made a movie about that, right?
I'm sorry?
There was a movie made about Deepwater Horizon.
Yes. And actually, if for any of you who have not seen the movie, it is actually pretty accurate, and it's very well done. There's a lot of things about it that you could pick some little things, but there's a lot of accuracy to the movie itself.
Very scary, basically.
Very scary. Very scary.
Very scary, the fact that you can let this happen nowadays and costing so much. Right. Not only human life, but environment, and the cost to BP. BP almost, I believe they said 5 years of profit were flushed down the drain.
Yeah, definitely. So I know, a lot of attention was really focused on the release of the oil, right, and the issues with the BOP that it failed to close. And of course, it took quite a long time for them to finally close that well. But one of the things that came out in the accident investigation report, which was basically a combination of the United States Coast Guard and BSEE, another federal regulatory agency, looked at what were the probable cause of the initial ignition. Now, speaking of the movie, what the movie demonstrated was that the engines, actually the intake to the engines, was determined to be the source of ignition. However, in the official report, the Coast Guard said, and BSEE said, that they could not fully determine exactly what the source of ignition was. However, they did put this in there in an April 2010 audit. There was a lot of electrical equipment that was on board that was in bad condition, severely corroded, that had been left in hazardous areas. And basically what they came up with is that there was no assurance that the electrical equipment was safe and could not have caused the explosions. So it is unfortunately bad maintenance, improperly applied equipment, improperly installed equipment, all kinds of issues. So, but again, that was never really fully determined, and unfortunately we'll never really know. Here's the key thing to remember from this. People think that if I buy a product that's certified for the environment, it isn't the whole picture, right? Because we also have to select it properly, we have to install it properly, and we have to maintain it. And if we don't do this, then obviously, no matter how good a job we do from an engineering design standpoint, if we don't install it properly, we don't maintain it, we haven't designed it properly, we're potentially risking disaster. So a lot of people, engineers, think that this is really more of an operational issue, right? And here's some pictures of some, examples of individuals obviously carrying out behavior that's probably not wise, right? But it's not.
I've seen worse in real life, Bob.
Yeah, it's not just an operational issue, right? Now, this slide, this is from a report that was done by the HSC, and it specifically dealt with control systems. So this isn't truly an apples to apples comparison from an EX perspective, but basically they looked at a lot of major industrial accidents and tried to find out what the root cause was. And so I think this is fairly representative of a lot of things that we find out in the field. But again, it's not a true apples to apples comparison of what the problem was. But if we look at this slide chart, again, we think it's just the operators, it's just the installation or something like that. But in reality, it actually, in many cases, is the specifications. And when we say specifications, it could be that the product is going into one particular environment, and yet the product is only suitable for a different environment. So it actually starts off not necessarily during the construction or operation or anything like that. It starts off when we're talking conception or building skid packages or building equipment or selecting that equipment for use in a hazardous area. So the important thing to remember from this, the safety function of competency applies to everybody within the food chain, if you will.
Yeah, and Bob, if you go back 1 second to that slide, you know, engineering a specification is, as manufacturer of product, so often we are requested to supply safety product for safety functions without specifying what the safety function is. So how can we define, so you then send the product that you don't know whether it's going to do the job it wants to do. And when you ask these questions, which are very basic questions, what you intend this product to do, most of the time there is no answer, and it's very scary. Very, very scary. You spend so much effort and money in define, design, engineer a product that will never fail in a certain situation, but then you use it in a completely different situation.
Correct. And it's a problem throughout the industry, and it deals with, you could start off, it's like that little game where people sit around a circle and one person starts whispering in one person's ear, and then it just works its way around. And by the time you get to the end, what was started was completely different. So because some of these projects and some of these installations involve so many people, and specifications in many cases are not really clearly written, they're done in such a way to where it's really no fault of the contractors. It's just an issue where we take our best educated guess. So unfortunately, we have to really do a better job with regards to EX.
We have an SRS course that you guys can look up online, on safety requirement specification for functional safety, how to write this specification. Okay, Bob, continue, sorry.
There you go. So this is an example from an inspection one of my colleagues did here not too terribly long ago. But basically, if you notice on the right-hand side, that was a panel that was installed into a Zone 2 area. But if you notice, the area classification stated very clearly on the panel itself, it was suitable for a non-hazardous area. Now, third-party inspections of safety critical hazardous area equipment result in an average failure rate of about 20 to 45%. Now, that number changes dramatically, and I've seen lots of different places where it may be less than that. In some cases, I've actually seen higher. But generally speaking, if you go to talk to inspectors, you talk to clients, you talk to the certifying agencies, you're going to find basically somewhere in that range. So what are the causes? It could be, again, incorrect selection, incorrect maintenance, poor maintenance, unauthorized incorrect modifications, and basically the root cause is lack of training, lack of knowledge, lack of competence. So I threw this in here, Paulo, you didn't see this, but this was literally a picture I got this morning.
Yeah, it's the first time I see the picture.
Yeah, so this was actually, we're doing an installation for this particular client. Okay. And my colleague was out there yesterday. So mind you, the plastic glands at the bottom, when you see, those aren't really going to be the glands. This was strictly doing some testing on the units themselves. But he sent me this picture and he said, hey, Bob, what do you see? And I looked at it, and if you see the picture on the right, you'll see a marking, hopefully you can see it, is EEXP 2B-T3. Well, this particular project requires, it's going into the offshore Gulf of Mexico, and it requires compliance to the Code of Federal Regulations for the Coast Guard, which requires either IECEX certification or North American certification for class and zone or class and division. That marking on there is not correct, and it shows no certification authority or anything like that. So this is a scenario where our organization is coming in to actually do an installation on the glands and not doing an inspection on the equipment. And of course, my guy is asking me, do we bring this up with the client? And I guess the point I'm trying to make is everybody has a role within the safety of this. So as I told him this morning, I said, please do. Let's bring this up to the client because this right now is not in compliance to what the requirements of the standards say.
Yeah, we should all, when we come across something that doesn't feel right, it's not right, we need to bring it up.
Bring it up.
And you can't allow something like this to go in the field and one day, boom, people die because of that.
Absolutely.
All right, we have another poll here. Let me try to bring this up. Okay, let me see if this is the correct one. Okay, you guys see a poll? Yeah, okay, it's coming. What is the leading root cause of industrial accidents? All right. Well, so far, 100% right answer. Okay. You know, amazing how quickly some of you guys answer the poll. I have hardly enough time to pop it up and boom, 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 answer coming. All right. All right. People are still answering. So the answer, potential answer, operation, specification, installation, changes after commissioning, which are called modifications, design and implementation. So, okay, I think we can end the poll. All of them cause problem, but which is the leading cause? I guess most of you got it right. Right, Bob?
Yep, absolutely. Well done.
Well done. Specifications. Yeah, as we said earlier, specification have a real problem.
Yep.
We spend so much time in money in, selecting the best product, but we also need to how to use it. And also, we come across so many instances where you go to a customer and say, well, have you done your analysis, your impact analysis, or your, I said, no, we just need everything seal-free. Okay. If you don't, anyhow, let's go.
So what specifically on competency do the standards say? So if we pull up 60079-14, in Annex A, it defines the knowledge, skills, and competencies of 3 different people, if you will. We have a responsible person, that could be a project manager, a project engineer, the operators and technicians, which are typically the people that are installing the equipment, and then finally the designers that are responsible for the design and selection of the equipment. So it's basically divided into 3 different roles. And within those roles, it tells you specifically what that individual's knowledge should be and the skills, if you will. So things like understanding of relevant electrical engineering, ability to read and assess engineering drawings, understanding general principles of explosion protection. If you notice designers versus operator technicians, the one big difference is that under operator technicians, it says understanding of general principles, where designers, it says detailed knowledge of the general principles. So designers have a higher level of responsibility. Therefore, we expect designers to have a higher level of knowledge. Things like lockout, tagout, workout procedures, that's really not going to be part of designers. That's going to be more of the operator technicians. So it's basically defined. When we go to the next, for competencies, it basically tells what are the competencies required. So these are all listed, again, for those 3 different roles. And then finally, there's an assessment. And as I mentioned very early on, the assessment is usually the area in which people kind of question, what do I need to do? But basically, the standard says it shall be verified and attributed at intervals relevant to national regulations or standards or user requirements on the basis of sufficient evidence that the person has the skill, can act competently, has the relevant knowledge and understanding. So we basically have more or less put that assessment process in the standard as well. And this information is exactly the same as what is listed in the -17 standard, the inspection standard. Now, this is actually the addition 2 of the 80079-34 standard. This applies to manufacturers of EX equipment. And where this and why this was brought into play in addition to is that a lot of auditors were going into facilities of people that were manufacturing EX equipment, and they were finding that even the manufacturers themselves were doing things wrong. And so this clause was actually put into the latest edition, edition 2 of competency. So it says the organization shall determine the necessary competence, ensure that these people are competent based upon education, training, or experience. What actions are we taking? And then retain our documentation. So some people ask about this standard. This standard is actually for a manufacturer. If you have your ISO 9001 certification, this is a bolt-on, if you will, that goes on top of your ISO requirements and standards. So it's written very much as a bolt-on standard to follow the ISO 9001. Now this is coming soon. We don't know if it's going to be a technical specification or if it'll just be a standard, but basically it's IEC TS 60079-44. And it's supposed to come out in 2021, Explosive Atmospheres Part 44, Personal Competence. So now all of a sudden there is a standard that is actually being developed by the IEC or a technical specification. And basically, I don't have a lot of knowledge on it, exactly what's going to be in there. But basically the premise is to harmonize requirements for the level of knowledge of personnel performing activities related to explosive atmospheres globally. So one of the downsides of what you find in the Annex A or Annex B of the -14 and -17 standards, it only defines really 3 roles and responsibilities. I expect that this standard will actually expand that significantly. That will define a little bit more as far as other roles and responsibilities and most likely expand on what we have in the annex. So
that sounds great, Bob. That is something we need, you know, we need a standard of competency.
We do. So it's a lot of confusion.
Sorry, Bob, I'm not sure what's coming next. Well, eventually later we come back to the pie chart. Let's continue.
Okay. So what programs are available? There is basically the CompEx program, which I mentioned that came out of the Piper Alpha. And then the IECEX has also developed a program. Now, these are not the only 2 programs. There are other regional programs. These are the 2 that are most well-known, that are most referenced in most of the standards around the world, or I shouldn't say standards, but client specifications. So I wanted to at least give you an understanding of the similarities and the differences between the 2. So CompEx, there's 14 knowledge and assessment units. They're called EXO 1 through 14. The 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 meet the competency requirements for operators. The 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, again, they meet the requirements from 17, which is inspections for the operatives. There's an EX12A and a 12B, which is for the designers. And then there's a new one called the EX14 for the responsible persons. So as you see, these modules are basically set to meet the requirements of what is in Annex A. So the most common one is the EXO 1 through 4 program. That was the original one for the operator technicians. So what you see on the right-hand side is actually our setup here, where we provide CompEx, and the candidates will actually have some practical assessments where they have to go in and do installations and inspections of EX equipment. The EX12, the other main course that CompEx is known for the designers, is a 5-day classroom type course with a lot of exams. By the way, the training and assessment is handled by 2 people, but they can be part of the same organization. So you have to have a separation between the person who trains and the person who assesses. There are 52 centers located worldwide. Most of them are located in the UK. They're owned and operated by JT Limited. The centers are actually run by third-party organizations. So they could be folks like Intertech. There's various organizations that run CompEx. All of those organizations are vetted and audited by JTL, and JTL determines the course content to be delivered by the third party. One thing about CompEx is the course materials, if you will, even though they're done by each center, they're all based upon the same relevant standards and documentation. And again, they're vetted and audited by JTL. So sometimes people will ask, is it better for one CompEx center versus another The materials that you're going to find, excuse me, is going to be virtually identical. The layouts of the bays, all of that good stuff. So it really comes down to who's your instructor, the cost, the convenience, all of that good stuff. So CompEx is very consistent amongst all the centers. Under the IECEX Certificate of Personnel Competency, there's actually 10 modules. So you start off with 000 and work your way through. And you'll see when you actually compare modules under COMPEX versus the IECEX, there's an awful lot of overlap. So I won't go through all of these right now. We'll talk a little bit more about some of them later on. But basically, the main one that everybody really needs to take if you start off is do the 001, which is your fundamentals course. And there you can kind of pick and choose depending on what you wish to achieve. Or you can just finish with 001 and be done with it. So how is this run? So a certifying body, an IECEX certifying body, can apply to become a certifying body for the COPC scheme. So 15 of the IECEX certifying bodies have gone through that, and you can go to the IECEX website and you can see them. They're listed right there. There's similar product certification, not exactly, but the EXCB assesses the candidates. So just as if an IECEX certifying body assesses a product, they are also responsible for assessing the candidate as well. Now there's another step in this whole thing. There's also what is called an IECEX recognized training provider, and this is fairly new within the IECEX. So there's currently 32 recognized training providers. We are one of them. We're located worldwide. They're vetted by the IECEX to deliver the course content around the IECEX scheme. Here's the important thing to note. The candidates are not mandated to be trained by a training provider. As much as I would love to tell you, you must go to one of these training providers, you do not. Under the IECEX scheme, you can actually be assessed by a certification body only. So if you already have the underpinning of knowledge, you can contact an EXCB that offers the COPC and say, I want to be assessed. And they can do that. Now, the training modules can be fixed or portable, excuse me. Each RTP can provide flexible training options. As an example, the units that you see on the right, that's part of our EX003 practical assessment module. So our assessment module is built to be portable, but other RTPs or EXCBs will actually have different assessment modules that might be designed in a different way. So there's a slight difference between all of the EXCBs as far as their assessment modules. Now, most of the RTPs have teamed up with an IECEXCB in order to streamline the process. So in our case, we've teamed up with a Canadian IECEXCB QPS. So we provide the training, QPS provides the assessment. The exams are pulled from a common database. And here's the important thing to note as well, if you're interested in the IECEX COPC, not all EXCBs are approved for all modules. So you really have to do some digging there to find out which modules you wish to take. And then you can look online on the IECEX website to find out if that CB is certified to be able to provide assessment against that particular module. So the certificates both for COMPEX and IECEX are valid for 5 years. The one nice thing about IECEX is just like your product certificates, the certificate of personnel competency certificates are also online as well. So you can download them, you can access them, and they're good for 5 years. So a couple things really just to wrap up, and we'll get into the questions and answers, but it is needed now more than ever. Again, I tell people, do your own research on training assessment programs. And again, understand that training is not a requirement, but the assessment is. And here's the key thing to remember, whatever you do, that chain is only as strong as the weakest link. Hopefully you now have a better understanding that it's not just the operational folks, it's not just the contractors that are doing installations. It really starts off at a very early stage. And it also carries on through the entire life cycle of that piece of equipment or that installation. So we all have ownership in this to make sure that our installations are safe, and we don't want you to be that weakest link.
Yeah, and Bob, let me mention, that in cooperation with you, GMI will start hopefully soon to run these courses But we have a question already. Do we have personal competency in training in India? I don't know. Maybe soon.
Yes, I believe there is. Actually, if, oh gosh. Well, and here's the thing, just as a more of an FYI, and this isn't true for all organizations, but for example, here in the States, you can actually contact one of your recognized training providers, and they may be able to come to your location, depending on which modules you want. So for example, we did one in December for a client up in Canada, where instead of having all those folks come down here, I ended up traveling up there, so it saved a lot of money, a lot of time. So there's ways that you can actually do this mobile, and there's discussions about doing it also virtual during this age of COVID. The issue is
a little bit what we are trying. We will try to do, Bobby. We will try to run this course at different locations, but also at the same time to, as we do for the functional safety courses, to have a course. We call it in-house courses. So if you guys,
right,
we can come to you. Of course, you know, we need a few people to make it worthwhile and not cost a fortune for you guys.
Right.
Before we move to question and answer, there wasn't a question that John posed on that chai part. I'm sorry. Yes, sorry, I got that wrong. So do you mind going back a few slides? And the question was, is that the pie chart was specifically for control system, or does it translate to all industrial accidents?
No, it is specifically control systems. So again, I don't want to emphasize, I want to let you know that this is not necessarily applies to EX, right? But it's the closest that I found of going back and looking at root causes of industrial accidents. And again, this was only for the UK. So everybody is going to have numbers that are going to be different. I have seen some other studies and research that have been done that have been put out for oil field accidents, and there's some great stuff out there, but I haven't really necessarily found something that is really applies necessarily to EX equipment. So again, I'm not saying that this is applicable for all industries, all markets, and certain. But it at least gives you an understanding that it is an issue that comes up from, it's not just an operation standpoint, it's not just an installation standpoint, it's not just a maintenance standpoint. In many cases, a lot of these problems take place at the very early stages in design.
Okay, well, we'll soon move to the next, the answer to the question you posed during the registration. I have a question here that says, this 44 standard, 79-44, will be out for 2021, or what do you think?
It did get pushed back. The gentleman who's the committee chairman for that is a gentleman by the name of Marty Cole, and he's with Hubble up in Canada. I've reached out to Marty, and the last I've heard is that they are looking to publish it in May. So we'll see. I wouldn't hold my breath, but we'll see.
All right, so let
Paulo, I'll stop sharing my screen. You want to bring up your screen?
Yeah, I should do so. Well, let me see if I don't mess this up. Okay. Okay, so we have we received several questions during your registration. We prepared answers to that. All right, Bob, do you see my screen?
I see your screen.
All right, so let's go to the first question. And let me remind you guys, you can type question in the question and answer box now at any time, and we'll try to get to those also. Okay, so the first question was, all right, when will IECEX COPC be published? Well, we just answered that question. And the reason IECEX COPC is not an harmonized EN standard.
Yeah, so the next slide.
Next slide. Yes.
So yes, it is supposed to be published in 2021. And this was an interesting question. So I didn't quite, I wanted to look at it, and I don't really have a specific answer, but 60079-33 was published by the IEC back in, I believe it was 2014 as an IEC standard. Now it is type S protection, which is special. So if you have a piece of EX equipment that doesn't fall within EXD, EXE, EXI, there's actually a means to actually have what is called special protection. It's very vague. I don't want to say vague, but it's very much a standard that is left to the EXCB and the client to make a determination. So the standard, if you will, is very much puts a lot of onus, because again, it doesn't fall within any of the other standards. It's a lot more open-ended. So it was not adopted as an EN standard, but it was adopted as a technical report from the by Senelec from the IEC. So it is not officially an EN standard, but it is adopted as a technical report. And technical reports, just in technical specifications, are basically, in many cases, precursors to standards, or in the case of technical reports, typically they're normative. They usually provide additional information on how to achieve it, and they're not necessarily going to become a standard. So the question is a good question. I don't really have a good answer.
Well, no, I believe you answered quite correctly. Let's go on to the next one.
Okay.
I'm a designer interested in the IECEX COPC module. Which module should you recommend? Because as already discussed, there are many modules.
Right. So the EX001, the fundamentals, that's pretty much a prerequisite. There is one module that you don't have to take 001, but you would have to take 001 for pretty much all of the other modules. The other module I would look at would be the EX009, which is the design course. So what we do, we actually offer that as a back-to-back. So you actually do the 001 in about 2 days. The 009 is about 2 days. So you get that all completed in about a 4-day time frame.
I guess it much depends what type of, where you are, what type of engineers you are, if you are an end user, if you are an EPC.
Now, something I didn't mention, but this brings up a point. So if you go through these training programs and you have the knowledge, but remember, competency is more than just knowledge. It's also your experience. So the IECEX and the EXCBs, there is no prerequisite for 001. For 009, the prerequisite is to take 001, or at least be deemed competent, but also in order to get an IECEX certificate, you have to prove that you've actually put that type of stuff in use. Meaning that, have you been designing EX installations for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? So part of getting your COPC is not just going through the training and being assessed, but it's also providing the documentation. So that's an important thing to note, because we do have people that come through the courses and say, hey, I want to get this. And we're saying, you know what, you can get it, but it's, or you can do it over time as well. You can do 001 now and do 009 later, or do something like that. But it is a requirement under the EX009 design course to actually have, I think it's 2 to 3 years of practical experience.
Yeah, and it's very much the same for functional safety. You are required to have 3 years of experience before you come to the course and be certified. Right. Okay, let's move to the next one. While we do that, there is an online question that we might answer. This says, this answer will come. What is better, COPC or IECEX COPC? Now, there was a question here online. Questions start to pop in rapidly. We said, what is there any difference between ATEX and IECEX key? I don't believe so.
Yeah, from an equipment certification procedure, there is a difference. So under ATEX, you go to a notified body. Under IECEX, you go through an IECEX CB. And, but the big difference is under the ATEX directive for category 3 zone 2 equipment, the manufacturer can issue a declaration of conformity. So you may not have to involve a notified body to get certification for zone 2. Mind you, the EN standards, which are the basis for the ATEX directive, are identical to the IEC standards, with the exception of national or annexes that'll be located in either the front or in the back of the standards themselves. But the actual technical details of the equipment, of what it has to be tested to, regardless if it's ATEX or IECEX, it's basically one and the same. It's really a difference between the how you go about it and what you're allowed to do.
So the question here was if it's CompEx is any better or IECEX COPC?
Right.
Now,
yeah.
that's a tough question.
That's a tough one. So again, I am an instructor and assessor under Compex, and we do training under the RTP program. They're both great. I would say this, it's really boils down to what's convenient, or if you're working for a client or if you're a subcontractor, ask your client which one they prefer. And in some cases, I will tell you, Compex being around for 26 years now is much more widely known in certain markets. So chances are, if you're doing any work for a UK company, they're probably going to call out Compex. If it's someplace in Southeast Asia or in other parts of the world, they may actually call out IECEX. Or they may call out nothing. They just say, you know, you should be assessed by a recognized organization. So you need to know that, obviously, because it's important to understand that. But they're both great. They're both great programs. And I'll be happy to talk to anybody about that offline. So
we have a live question that might fit in this. So let me pose it to you, Bob. It says, out of CompEx or IECEX or any other certificate is sufficient to demonstrate the design competence, or do you need to complete both? I guess
no,
one will be sufficient.
Right. No, that's a good question. I would say this. I mean, I've been through the Compex 12 course, the design course, and I wrote our 9 IECEX 009 design course. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of similarities. It's, I would say personally, if you decide to go a route with one, stay with that route. There's no reason to do both unless you just want to increase your knowledge along those lines. And your cost, right? Of course. So, either one. Again, what the standard. Here's the important thing to remember: the standard doesn't say you must have Compex. It doesn't say you must have IECEX. It doesn't say that. It just says that you shall be assessed, and by somebody. And so that's really where these fit the bill. Both organizations, and even though the IECEX is part of the IEC, and of course they pushed very hard to get that mandated within the IEC, and the IEC said, no, we're not going to do that. So,
and in fact, this answers a question we have also here online been here for a while. Is it mandatory, the personnel certification? No,
I would say this, it's mandatory, yes and no.
All right.
You really have to follow. Remember, what the standard says is the standard. It's really what do the regulators say. So if the regulatory authority is saying that the person must have competency, then yes, you must have it. So let's not confuse what the standard says and what the regulatory agency says. For example,
to have competency, in all honesty, the best way is to show a piece of paper. So you say, I've gone for a training program and I have a certificate to prove it, but competency can be proven in many other ways. So
that's
per
right.
se, the training program is not a mandatory requirement, right?
The training isn't mandatory. The assessment, basically to have that piece of paper that says you've been assessed by some organization, is typically what is required. So again, is it mandated by the standards? No, it really falls down to the regulatory authority, whoever has jurisdiction. That's really the key thing. So you need to understand that, and that's where you have to go back and find out. And again, if you're a subcontractor for a client, the client may say, hey, this is what we're requiring for you in building pieces of equipment for our system. So it may not be a regulatory thing. It may be a client specific thing. So
this is, I believe, what the next question was. So will be products to IEC 8079-34, and I've been told we need competency by a certifying agency. So now is the customer requiring, and if the customer is always right.
Right.
So what are my options? Okay, these are your options.
Yeah, and we talked about that. So I think a lot of that will be spelled out in the 60079-44 standard.
Okay, next, let's see if we are coming close to the end of our webinars. I want more info on the IECEX COPC. Well,
right. So the good thing is that you can actually go to the IECEX website, and they have what you would want to do is under publications, look for operational documents, OD, and OD 504. That basically spells out the units of competency, assessment outcomes. And then if you decide you wish to actually go through it, go through OD 502, that's your application form. The OD 521, it has to deal with the recognized training provider program. So that's what I had to do to become a recognized training provider. So a lot of that documentation is online, it's available, it's free. So you don't have to pay for it, which is nice.
And somebody, if I can spell it right, Anandan is saying that in India it is mandatory. Very possible. Every country has its own rules. I know, for example, in Norway they have strict requirement also.
They do. I cannot speak for India. I've heard anecdotal evidence, the IS standards in India. I've read them. I haven't seen anything that mandates it. So I really can't answer that question. I don't know. I know India has adopted, is becoming more and more adopting some of the IEC standards as becoming Indian standards, like what you see in places like Brazil, where they've adopted the IEC standards and turned them into Brazilian standards. And you're seeing that in various other parts of the world. So I would expect that over the next couple years, you're going to see more and more of this competency requirement be adopted in the country-specific standards. If it's not an IEC standard, you'll see it in there. In matter of fact, we've actually, here in the United States, we've adopted the 60079-17 inspection standard, and we have now put in there the competency requirements. However, what's interesting about that is that in the IEC standards, it says things like shall, which shall means you must, right? In the US version of it, we put should. So there was a lot of pushback on putting shall versus should. So it really, again, falls to the authority who has jurisdiction.
You have to know English to understand the difference, of course. But okay, great. So what about COMPX? How can they, our guests find out more about COMPX?
Yeah. So if you go to the next slide, Paulo, the website is compex.org.uk. And you can find out more about the program. You can find out more about all the centers that are located. So feel free to go there, and you can check it all out.
All right. Let's see. We have a question. We had a question of registration talking about seal competency, seal application. And of course, GMI knows well about that because Bob is also a qualified functional safety engineer.
Well, I let mine expire, so I didn't.
Okay.
I have to renew, but it is, if you go to the 61508 and 61511 standards, it does say that people shall be competent. So, but again, it's a standard that's written. It's really up to the authority who has jurisdiction of whether or not they adopt that fully. But you are finding in various parts of the world under functional safety, they're requiring that as well. So the functional safety course that GMI offers in conjunction with TINO, the TUV Rhineland course, is one method to show competency.
Well, before we get to the end of it, there was a question I kept for you. It's a very interesting question. So let me pose it to you. It is a live question. Do you foresee hazardous area inspection by certified independent personnel becoming a job profession in the future?
Yes, I would. I tell people this all the time. It's, even if you don't, you will learn a lot by going through the COMPEX or the IECEX programs. And there's going to be more and more demand for that, I feel, long term. It's still a lot of some customers, matter of fact, I mean, we're literally doing one, as I showed you that picture, this client that we're doing this one project for, wasn't to do inspections, although since we're out there, we're looking at the equipment, we obviously see things. So, but I did an inspection 2 weeks ago over in Louisiana that we were contracted out. We'll do we've got some inspections involved here next month. So yes, there is a demand. And trust me when I tell you this, I don't think there's ever been an inspection that I've done where I haven't been able to find faults. And it's not as if I want to really find the faults, but you will almost always see issues. And so it's definitely going to be something that I think for a young person that had some experience in the EX world, it would certainly be something great.
Yeah, and we have the very same comments from Tino when he does inspection of functional safety on plants. He always finds issues. Okay, guys. During the sign up, we had also a lot of requests about different questions about different functional safety, application oriented. We cannot get to those in this webinar about hazardous locations. There are many live webinars we do specific to the question you posed. For example, installation in hazardous locations, how to select the barrier. There were many, so we cannot get, they were not specific to this webinar, so we leave them for the next webinar. So you guys go on there. Now we come close to the end of our webinar. It's been over an hour. Let me do this. Let me see how we did. Let me see if I can pull out, let me stop sharing here and actually make a last poll so you guys can let us know how me and Bob did.
If it was good, it was me. If it was bad, it was Paulo.
Yeah, or the other way around.
No.
Not quite sure about that. Okay. Well, I'm very glad to tell you, most of the people that have begun with us are still with us. So indeed, we must have been doing good. There was a last question. I need to go on, but thank you. Well, okay, thank you, guys. Okay, everybody answered, and we got, I will show you. Excellent was, okay, share result. We had a 90% excellent response. So thank you, Bob. You did really good. And you guys, thank you for being with us. Follow us on our website. You can see all the training and classes we have. We will post this webinar online in our YouTube channel soon, and we will send each one of you the slides that we have shown you. So look for those coming in the future. Ciao, Bob. The best to you and the family down in Texas.
You too.
It's evening, so we go home for dinner. Ciao, guys.
Ciao.